According to the Federal Transit Administration, in recent years, there's been a 121% increase in transit worker assaults like this one. In July, gunfire shattered glass around this bus driver on Oakland, California's AC transit system, which according to the FTA's preliminary 2023 data, has the highest rate of assaults on transit workers in the country.
It's been rough persuading those living in the country's urban centers to ditch their cars for public transit. And incidents like the one you just watched have a lot to do with it. But those who lack other means of transportation have it much worse, as they're increasingly met with violent attacks and assaults on buses, at subway stations, and on trains. We'll get back to the experiences of those who rely on public transit in just a moment, because what they've been going through is absolutely outrageous to say the least. But I want to start off by drawing specific attention to the terror that transit workers are facing as they simply try to do their jobs. Keep in mind, they work in jobs that are incredibly important, essential to communities around the country. But they feel as though their lives and their safety is nothing more than an afterthought. The Urban Institute recently studied major assaults involving transit workers for bus and rail services. What they found was disturbing, including the fact that assaults have actually tripled since 2008. Major assaults on transit workers, meaning those resulting in death or a trip to the emergency room, rose nearly threefold nationally between 2008 and 2022, from 168 to 492, the Urban Institute found, using data from the Federal Transit Administration's National Transit Database. For some who want to minimize this, those numbers might not sound like a lot. But remember, we're only talking about assaults that led to a fatality or someone getting hospitalized. Those numbers do not include less grievous assaults like hitting, kicking, and spitting. In other words, the number of assaults on transit workers is much, much higher. Operators have also reported being robbed, having things thrown at them, being doused with urine and hot beverages, being threatened at gunpoint, and shot at. Back in 2022, the Washington Post profiled the story of a Denver area bus driver named Suna Karabey, who had immigrated to the United States from Turkey and absolutely loved her job. That is, until she didn't. Much like other big cities, crime, public drug use, and homelessness exploded in Denver during the coronavirus pandemic. Karabey was confronted by the dysfunction as riders spit on her, hit her, and even threatened her with deadly weapons like knives. The windshield of her bus had been shattered multiple times by people throwing rocks or bottles at her. She told reporters that she was even chased into a restroom during one of her breaks. Some of the incidents that were highlighted by that Washington Post piece were so horrifying that I don't think I could ever forget the piece and the overwhelming sense of injustice Karabey was dealing with. There was Billings Street, where in the summer of 2021, a mentally unstable passenger tried to punch a crying toddler, only to be tackled and then shot in the chest by the toddler's father. And Dayton Street, where Suna, the bus driver, had once asked a man in a red bikini to stop smoking fentanyl, and he'd shouted, "Here's your COVID, bitch," before spitting in her face. And Downing, where another number 15 bus driver had been stabbed nearby with a 3-inch blade. The most horrifying episode happened on North Yosemite Street. An intoxicated and emaciated 57-year-old woman had jumped out in front of a moving number 15 bus, shouted at the driver to stop, and then pushed her way on board. She'd started cursing at other passengers, pacing up and down the aisle until a man twice her size stood up in the back of the bus and punched her in the face with a closed fist, slamming her to the floor. "Who ain't never been knocked out before?" he asked, as the woman lay unconscious in the aisle. And then he stood over her as the other passengers sat in their seats and watched. "Here's one more," he said, stomping hard on her chest. He grabbed the woman by the ankle and flung her off the bus, leaving her to die of blunt force trauma on the sidewalk. "We can keep riding though," one of the other passengers had told the driver moments later. "We gotta go to work, man." Now, the driver was understandably worried that the man was going to hurt her next. But as he was walking off the bus, he banged his fist into the windshield, cursed, and then exited, luckily without harming her. Other public transit workers aren't so lucky. Look, I got a lot of grief from some members of the left last year for highlighting the story of an African-American subway worker in New York City who was sent to the hospital with a broken collarbone after he was viciously assaulted. A man who has been arrested 41 times for assault has just sent a New York City subway worker to the hospital with a broken collarbone and a dislocated nose. Now, the suspect, Alexander Wright, again, has been arrested for assault 41 separate times. But apparently that's not enough to keep him out of the public to ensure that people are safe. Nelson's family is furious about this. Again, they're wondering why he was out on the street. Lisa Nelson, the victim's mother, says, "This man, Alexander Wright, should not be walking the streets. I hope these politicians and these judges give him the max that he deserves and do not let him walk free." And by the way, one of Alexander's past victims was involved in a hate crime as well toward an Asian woman. We're gonna show you the video of what he did. It's difficult to watch, so I wanna give you that warning. But without further ado, this is a man who's been arrested 41 times and is just released back onto the streets to assault other people. This is unacceptable. This is 100% unacceptable. I'm done with this. Whatever this is not criminal justice reform. Allowing people who are clearly a threat to public safety, allowing people who are assaulting and hurting workers as they're just trying to do their jobs and get through the day, unacceptable. Now, prominent progressives like Breonna Joy Gray weren't happy with me for refusing to provide cover for that brutal assault in the name of, I guess, leftism.
Part of why people were upset on the internet is because Anna Kasparian works for what is perceived to be one of the flagship left media outlets in the country. So for one, I just want to say that part of the response to her was not an expectation that she's representing the kind of normie view of criminal justice, but that she is ostensibly supposed to be representing the left view. And regardless of whether you agree with her, she absolutely didn't do that.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize that wanting to protect workers from violent assaults on the job wasn't a left-wing priority. I actually thought it was. I also thought the left wanted people to, transition to public transportation and drive their cars less. But who the hell would want to do that if this is what they'll have to deal with? The Washington Post reporting I was referencing earlier briefly mentioned similar trends in other cities across the country. Philadelphia was reporting an 80% increase in assaults aboard buses. The transportation union president in Tucson said the city's buses had become a mobile refuge frequented by drug users and mentally ill and violent offenders. The sheriff of Los Angeles County had created a new transit unit to keep passengers from having to step over dead bodies or people injecting themselves. Los Angeles, the city I was born and raised in. It's also the city where citizens were set ablaze by mentally unstable people who should have been institutionalized. Like on May 7th of that year, when out of nowhere, a mentally ill homeless woman squirted a man with flammable liquid and set him on fire with a lighter in Pasadena. That man was rushed to the hospital in serious condition, but luckily survived. That same month, another man was set on fire at a downtown LA bus stop near Olympic and Flower Street. Fortunately, he survived too. But earlier that same year, in January of 2022, a healthcare worker was attacked by a mentally ill homeless man at Union Station in downtown LA. She wasn't as lucky and died as a result. Carrie Bell was charged with murdering Sandra Shells, who worked as a nurse at USC Medical Center. Shells was attacked shortly after 5 a.m. on Thursday, January 13th, at a bus stop on Cesar Chavez Avenue. And according to investigators, Bell punched Shells so hard that she fell to the concrete, fracturing her skull. The investigation reveals she was attacked for no apparent reason. But maybe I should be a good leftist and pretend like these incidents didn't happen? Nah, I'll keep speaking up, thanks. In fact, incidents like these led to an outcry by maintenance workers at Union Station. We're talking about low-wage workers, many of whom are immigrants, with difficult jobs that were made even more unbearable by the violence they deal with at work. They didn't sign up for that, and they don't deserve it. According to Alejandra Valles, who works as the chief of staff for the SEIU United Service Workers West, 19 of the 21 janitors working at Union Station reported being threatened or assaulted while doing their jobs. One of the custodial workers told the Los Angeles Times, "We are scared, we are frustrated. Every day something happens. We don't know if we are going to return home to see our children." Renee Herrera, who's one of the managers at a deli called Tremana at Union Station, said that people have quit their jobs over the abuse. And that was a broader trend reflected in the study by the Urban Institute. In fact, another study, a survey by the American Public Transportation Association, found that more than 9 in 10 public transit agencies were having difficulty hiring new employees, particularly bus drivers. That sounds kind of important, no? If you want people to ride public transportation, you need workers for public transit, and you need people who feel safe enough to actually use the public transportation. Principled progressives rightly care deeply about workplace conditions, and they demand that companies and corporations protect their employees while they're on the job. These demands shouldn't take a backseat when violence is carried out by the mentally ill or those struggling with addiction and homelessness. In fact, and I want to be clear about this, most people with mental illness do not harm others. But unfortunately, some do. Some do harm others. And instead of imprisoning them, they need to be removed from the public to receive mandatory and adequate mental health treatment. Emphasis on the mandatory part. The Urban Institute unfortunately boils the problem down to income inequality, likely because they don't want to ruffle feathers with the criminal justice reform squad that wants to avoid institutionalizing anyone who poses a threat to public safety. Like the repeat offender who sucker punched an Asian woman and then went on to send a subway worker to the hospital with broken bones. Did Brianna Joy Gray think that that person should have been sent to either a facility for mental health or to prison? I don't know, let's watch.
As horrible it is to sucker punch someone in the face, you don't go to jail for 40 years for that, and nor should you. Right? Obviously, you should not go to jail for the rest of your life.
When you go to jail.
So the point is that
you do have to go to jail.
He's gonna keep getting out. People like these are gonna keep being on the street because the jail is not a solution to the kinds of issues that they're dealing with.
I respectfully disagree. Some people need to be rehabilitated, whether it be through mental health treatment or through a reformed prison system. You know, prisons could be reformed to be rehabilitative rather than abusive torture chambers. Simply throwing our hands up and saying that prisons are bad is ridiculous. Fortunately, in 2017, California reformed Valley State Prison as part of a pilot program meant to operate like the facilities you'd find in Nordic countries. The emphasis is rehabilitation, and it's nicknamed Prisnyland.
But the more you get to know Prisnyland, which officials say some locals refer to it as, you realize the first barriers coming down aren't actually physical.
One of the principles of the California model is normalization, and the idea is we want to make the environment inside our institutions as normal as possible, with the goal of not releasing somebody who's institutionalized, but releasing citizens back to the community who have practiced normal pro-social behavior. Our goal is to basically help them become better citizens. So with that in mind, we are not in the punishment business. We're in the rehabilitative business.
I found it. Go to bat. All right, perfect.
A big part of that rehabilitation, a wide array of programs where the population learns a variety of coping and calming skills.
And she is a good horse.
Did you know you were going to be grooming horses in prison?
No, to be honest, I thought I'd be stuck in a cell, maybe a few rehabilitation groups, but it helps me, cope with, a lot of stresses I deal with, day to day here in prison.
The hope is that creating a more positive environment makes the men locked up here more willing to rehabilitate. Of the total incarcerated population of 3,000 here, the prison says 2,400 are enrolled in training or education programs, including high school and college.
When you came in and you saw what this was, what was your impression?
I thought I was gonna come to prison and get worse, but coming to prison actually saved my life.
Wow. Say it again.
Coming to prison saved my life.
You guys have no idea how relieved I was to see this. This was a report done by NBC weeks ago, and it wasn't on my radar until literally today as I was researching for this story. And so there are 2 prisons now, state prisons in California, that are part of this pilot program. And I love to see it because my concern was that all of the so-called reforms led to the dysfunction that we're seeing on the streets, and that leads to a much smaller appetite for the reforms that we need in policing and in our prison system. Okay, and there are already some promising results with Valley State Prison's new model. According to reports from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, prisons across the state have seen between 15 to 32 homicides each in total, right? And that's between the years of 2017 and 2021. But at Valley State, there have been 0 homicides within that state prison in that same time period, meaning that it is a safer environment where people are actually getting rehabilitated. And this is the kind of facility that I would like to see, created in other parts of the state, other parts of the country. So it's not just about being punitive, it's about ensuring that people are rehabilitated and are able to make good lives for themselves once they serve their sentence. This is what we should be fighting for on behalf of everyone in our communities. The hands-off approach to violent crime ensures that everyone loses. And I just want to be clear about one other thing. The other thing that we're experiencing right now on the streets is you have people who have mental illness, struggling, suffering, unable to make decisions for themselves, unable to make the decision to get the mental health treatment they need, or maybe unable to get the mental health treatment they need. And instead of institutionalizing them after they commit some sort of crime or engage in a violent attack, to keep the public safe, the argument is, well, that violates the civil liberties of the individual that we're allowing to wallow away and die on our streets. And by the way, if they're lucky, because if they're not lucky, the other thing that happens is they will commit a violent crime so terrible, including literally setting people on fire, that they'll end up in prison for the rest of their lives. So how exactly is that the humane option? Either death on the streets, or you're gonna end up in prison for the rest of your life. No, this is a broken system. This doesn't work. This doesn't make the situation better. Everyone loses with what we've been doing. But I am happy to see that there is some positive change happening in the state of California. And look, I don't care what my label is. I don't care if I'm being a very naughty leftist for telling the truth about what's happening. Call me left, call me right, call me center, I don't care. My number one principle, the motivating factor, the thing I care about the most, and what informs my opinions on political policy is doing what's right for workers in America. I'm never gonna advocate for any policy that asks workers to deal with even more hell at work, including violent assaults. No, not interested in that.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us, become a Young Turk.